Discrimination can be identified in a lot of different areas of today's society, but the main description behind discrimination is judging others based on one's personal ideas and thoughts. Discrimination is more relevant now than ever before. The idea of judging a person based on their race, belief, sexual preference, education, or age is just simply undignified and wrong. Even though there are a lot of types of different types of discrimination, we are going to focus on discriminating between races, which is known as racism. When thinking back to grade school, and most definitively in today's society, we realize that at a young age, children can oftentimes discriminate against one another. There are times where children are teased because of the color of their skin or the country they came from. If parents are not careful, we can ultimately and sometimes unknowingly teach our children how to discriminate. All throughout history, we have fought and put an end to racial discrimination, but sadly, we see that it still exists every day. Most people believe that racial discrimination is only in America, but in fact, there is racism all around the world. We will begin by exploring racism here in America, followed by taking a look at racism that occurs around the world. Race is a significant social issue. People use racial differences as a bias for discrimination. Let's begin by looking at the root of racism. Discrimination of races can be rooted as far back as biblical times, but much of today's racism can be traced to the era of colonialism that began in the 1400s. In the early 1400s, Europeans began to colonize and enslave several races, including Indians and Africans. A lot of Europeans who captured and enslaved these slaves adopted a superior mentality. Slaves were forced to serve or be killed as a result of their resistance. Forced labor was used in conjunction with imprisonment and capital punishment to control the peasantry and thereby making the ruling classes richer and more powerful. When I read a story called Desiree Baby, I am reminded of the days of slavery. There was a time in history when it was considered to be a disgrace for whites and blacks to procreate. Often the children were shunned and viewed as slaves. We find that still today there are people who view mixing of races as unacceptable. Some believe that due to the society imposing their negative views of mixing races has opened the door for racism. We have seen some instances where African Americans or black races have expressed animosity towards other races because of stereotypes and mistreatment. Indians were also enslaved during the 1400s. They created a civil rights movement to fight for their equality. President Abraham Lincoln was one of the first presidents to view all men equal. Lincoln wrote the Emancipation Proclamation on January the 1st, 1863. The proclamation declared that all persons held as slaves within the rebellious states are and henceforth shall be free. Although the Emancipation Proclamation did not end slavery in the nation, it did bring about awareness of racism. Lincoln was later assassinated because of his views of freedom for all and equality. There were a lot of segregations between races in the earlier part of the 20th century. The schools, restaurants, bathrooms, and even water fountains were assigned to a specific race. Brown versus the Board of Education was one of the first moves in history to remove segregation in public schools. Even though the transportation systems were not segregated, non-white passengers had to sit in the back. Many leaders were often killed due to fighting against segregation and racism. If we take a look at the past events, we can clearly see that no single race is exempt from racism. There was a terrorist attack made against the United States in 2001. The terrorists came from Iraq. During and after that time, a lot of the Iraq and Muslim citizens were scrutinized. They were watched on airplanes, in schools, and even in their homes. A whole entire race was a subject to discrimination because of the actions of a few individuals. The victims of these racial acts were beaten, threatened, and even killed. We need to understand that an entire nation cannot be responsible for a few heartless individuals. America is not the only place in the world where we see discrimination. There's racism all around the world. In Australia, an Australian Nationalist Party in Queensland won 25% of votes with their main line at fighting immigration by non-whites in June of 1998. In the article, the party's leader said that Australia was a danger of being swamped by Asians. The Aboriginal people have lost a lot of their land and suffered many prejudices in Australia. In 2009 and in 2010, there was an increasing number of racist attacks against Indians in Melbourne. They had such a fear of racist attacks and lynchings that the Indian government led to issuing an advisory warning about the dangers of traveling to Melbourne. Also in Africa in 1994, there was a Rwandan genocide. It was estimated that 500,000 to 1 million Tutsis were killed by the Hutu because of racial differences. Several people lost their lives. Voting into office, Barack Obama, as our first American president, should have proved a step in the right path to opening up to change in the way that we discriminate, in the way discrimination is viewed. But unfortunately, it hasn't. In his book, he states that change won't come from the top. Change will come from the mobilized grassroots. Discrimination is real and poses a real problem to our society. Racism is something that we can't run from, but is an issue that we have to face head on. We can only hope that one day we will have a world free from racism. But to do so, we have to start educating our children about racism, as well as teaching them how to live by the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Judge not by the color of your skin, but by the content of your character. Ending the division in society and bringing people together should be the core goal that we desire to a better world. Hatred is a cancer that eats away at our society and damages everyone. It creates violence, war, and economic suffering. It's important to unite with those who are different and with those who are suffering all over the world. Eliminating racism and hate is one of the core issues we are facing in the world today.